Walk into any old barn. Look around the fence lines. Check the corners where equipment used to sit. Scan the edges of the pasture. You'll see the same plant. Every time. Most people today would call it a weed. Something to spray. Something in the way. But ask anyone who farmed before 1960. Ask your grandfather, your great-aunt, anyone who worked the land back when farms were actually self-sufficient, and they'll tell you something different. That weed wasn't a nuisance. It was essential. Every farm had it. Not by accident. On purpose. Because this plant did things that nothing else could do. Things that kept farms running without constant external inputs, without chemical dependency, without the fragility we've built into modern agriculture. And then, somewhere along the way, we forgot. Not just forgot to grow it. Forgot why we grew it in the first place. Stay with me. Because this one hits different. The plant we stopped seeing. Let's start with what this plant actually did. It fed livestock, and not just as filler. Animals sought it out. Cows, chickens, pigs, goats. If they had access to it, they'd prioritize it over other forage. Why? Because it's protein-dense, mineral-rich, and has compounds that support digestion and overall health. Farmers didn't need to buy supplemental feed if their animals had access to this plant. It was free nutrition, growing on its own, asking for nothing. But it didn't stop there. This plant fixed nitrogen. If you're not familiar with nitrogen fixation, here's why it matters. Nitrogen is what plants need to grow. It's the N in NPK fertilizer. And most crops can't pull nitrogen from the air, they need it in the soil. But certain plants, including this one, have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria in their roots that convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form plants can use. Farmers knew this. They didn't call it nitrogen fixation. They just knew that wherever this plant grew, other crops grew better. So they let it grow. Strategically. Along field edges. In pastures. Around fruit trees. And there's more. This plant had medicinal uses. Farmers used it in poultices for wounds, both human and animal. It has anti-inflammatory properties. Some species were dried and made into teas for digestive issues or respiratory problems. Was it a cure-all? No, but it was available. Right there. Free. No trip to town. No prescription needed. One plant. Multiple functions. Feed. Fertilizer. Medicine. That's not a weed. That's a system. The name you probably know, but don't recognize. All right, enough suspense. The plant is clover. Specifically, red clover and white clover, though there are other varieties. And if you just thought, wait, that's what this video is about. Stay with me. Because that reaction is exactly the problem. Clover is so common, so ubiquitous, so dismissed as just a lawn weed, that we've completely lost sight of what it actually is and what it used to do. You've seen it. You've probably mowed over it 1,000 times. You might have sprayed it to get a clean lawn. But here's what you didn't know. Before synthetic fertilizers, clover wasn't optional. It was foundational to how farms worked. Farmers rotated crops through clover fields specifically to rebuild nitrogen in the soil. They mixed clover seed into pasture blends because it made livestock healthier and more productive. They planted it around orchards because it improved soil structure and supported pollinators. Clover wasn't just tolerated. It was managed, cultivated, valued. And then everything changed. In the mid-20th century, industrial agriculture arrived with a promise. You don't need complex, multi-species systems anymore. You can grow one crop, at massive scale, with perfect control. Here's what that required. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Why wait for clover to fix nitrogen when you can just dump it on the field as ammonia? Faster. More control. Higher yields per acre. Herbicides. Monocultures don't like competition. If you're growing only corn, anything else in the field, including nitrogen-fixing clover, is classified as a weed. So you spray it. Simplified pastures. Why manage a diverse mix of grasses, legumes, and forbs when you can plant a single high-yield grass variety and supplement with purchased grain? The logic was seductive. Maximize yield, minimize complexity. And it worked. Sort of. Yields went up. Farms got bigger. Grain production exploded. But something else happened, too. Farms became dependent. Dependent on fertilizer companies for nitrogen. Dependent on chemical companies for herbicides. Dependent on feed suppliers for livestock nutrition. The things clover used to do for free, fixing nitrogen, feeding animals, improving soil, supporting pollinators, were replaced by things you had to buy. The farm stopped being a self-regenerating system and became a production line that required constant external inputs. And clover? It went from essential farm plant to weed you spray to keep your lawn looking clean. That's not an accident. That's a business model. Let's be clear about what we're talking about here. This isn't about nostalgia. It's not about going back to some romanticized version of the past where everything was harder and slower. It's about asking a very specific question. What functions did we lose when we simplified ecosystems down to monocultures? Because here's the thing, clover didn't just fix nitrogen. It also prevented erosion. Its root system held soil in place during rains. Without it, topsoil washes away, which is exactly what's happening on industrial farmland right now at an alarming rate. Supported pollinators. Clover flowers are a critical nectar source for bees. When we removed clover from pastures and field edges, we removed bee habitat. And then we acted surprised when pollinator populations collapsed. Improved soil structure. The roots create channels that allow water and air to penetrate compacted soil. When clover dies back, it adds organic matter. Soil becomes richer, more alive. Reduced the need for antibiotics in livestock. Animals that graze on diverse pastures with clover are healthier, have stronger immune systems, and require fewer interventions. Monoculture grass plus grain equals more health problems. These aren't small things. These are foundational ecological functions that industrial agriculture replaced with purchased solutions. Clover used to do all of this for free as part of the system. Now we pay for fertilizer, pay for erosion control measures, pay for pollinator habitat restoration, pay for livestock medications. We didn't eliminate costs. We just moved them off the farm and into supply chains. Here's what's interesting. Clover is coming back. Not everywhere. Not in industrial operations. But among regenerative farmers, permaculture practitioners, and even some conventional farmers who are tired of input costs, clover is being reintroduced. They're planting it as cover crops in orchards, fixing nitrogen, attracting beneficial insects, outcompeting weeds naturally. Pasture diversity in rotational grazing systems, improving livestock health, reducing feed costs. Living mulch in no-till vegetable production, suppressing weeds, adding nitrogen, keeping soil covered. Companion planting in home gardens, attracting pollinators, enriching soil, creating habitat. And the results are exactly what old farmers would have predicted. Soil improves. Input costs drop. Yields stabilize. Resilience increases. Because it turns out that systems designed to work with ecology tend to be more stable than systems that fight it with chemicals. Crazy, right? But here's the thing that really gets me. Clover is just one plant. One example of something that used to be understood as essential, that got reclassified as a weed, that we spent decades spraying and removing, only to realize, oh wait, maybe that was doing something important. How many others are there? How many plants, insects, birds, fungi, bacteria? How many parts of the farm ecosystem did we strip away in the name of simplification, only to discover later that they were holding the whole thing together? And more importantly, why did we build a system that taught us to see complexity as a problem instead of as resilience? Because that's what clover represents. Not just a plant, a way of thinking. The old way of thinking said, a farm is an ecosystem. Everything has multiple roles. Diversity creates stability. The industrial way of thinking said, a farm is a factory. Maximize one output. Eliminate everything else. And for a while, the factory model looked like it was winning. If you have a lawn, consider this. Stop spraying the clover. Let it grow. See what happens. You might notice bees showing up. You might notice that the grass around the clover looks greener because nitrogen. You might notice that those patches stay green during droughts when the rest of the lawn goes brown because clover has deeper roots. If you have a garden, plant some. Red clover, white clover, crimson clover. There are varieties for almost every climate. Use it as a cover crop. Use it as a companion plant. Use it as a living mulch. Watch your soil improve. Watch the pollinators arrive. And if you're farming, even on a small scale, ask yourself, what would it look like to design for multiple functions instead of maximum yield of one thing? What would it look like to let the plants that used to run farms again?